Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 8 of the vlog. It is slightly overdue for an update, which I want to say I've been quite productive in that time, which is kind of true. You can see there's quite a few more things on the table, which I'll take a look at. I wanted to make sure that I put an episode out that wasn't just I've added some stuff to the table and actually had some useful content. So I mentioned in the last video that I was prepping for doing the river. I have been an absolute coward and put it off for quite a while, but somebody who listens to the show and has been watching the vlogs gave me some advice, which was super helpful on how to do the river pour a little bit better, which I will definitely be implementing. I've got to make sure that I get the rocks and the cliffs done off camera, but what I definitely wanted to do this session is to do the rock painting. So that's something that I think will be super useful for everyone to see how I do the leopard spotting process on the rocks. And take a little tour of the bits and pieces that I have done, some of the decisions I've made on the styling, and as you can see, a bit of a change to the concept with the walls, which has been an important change. I have done a lot more of the 3D printing projects, which I'll talk about some of the ups and downs for. You can see them here and over here. This is the towel that was the Hearst Arts molds that I've stuck with because I finished it and jazzed it up a lot. But it is remarkably heavy by comparison to these, so I am glad that I made the change. I think I've been a bit delayed because I did lack a bit of motivation. I had to replace the wall concept by printing out these walls, which is a long process to do, so I felt like I was getting a bit run down with the whole thing, as well as doing the tiles for the base. But thankfully, actually, because of putting out the vlogs, a viewer had gone back through the entire history and looked at them and left some really nice comments about this actually being useful for them on the videos, which kind of motivated me to get back into it. And I realised that I hadn't been tidying up after myself. This is a personal issue with the way I do hobby. In my work life, I'm super organised because my job requires me to be. In hobby time, it's a bit more chaotic, chaotic creativity, which is okay. For getting stuff done. The problem was at the end I had all of this space was covered with bits that were done, started, in the middle, mess that I just hadn't tidied up, and it kind of killed my motivation, just all this stuff everywhere. So after I had those comments, I thought, yeah, I need to get on with doing the next update for the vlog. So I cleared everything down, reorganised a whole load of stuff in the garage so I can fit more of my hobby stuff that I need to hand in the garage, and get on with some things. So I will do a little quick tour of the bits and pieces that I've added to the table, keep that brief, and then I will get on with the big job of doing the river pour and also doing the cliff painting, and we'll see where else that takes us. Okay, so the Hearst Arts tower is finished. I put a lot of clump foliage on top of all the bits and pieces that I'd done before, and I soaked these in PVA so they are super rock solid. Really happy with how it's come out overall. I've got a few issues, like there's some gaps in here, which you can't really see that well, which is good actually. And some errors on the back end that I'm gonna hide with 1 or 2 vines. There's this horrible gap here that I just couldn't fix and make it fit. So I put some vines in here, but I've done a video on how to do those already, so they're quite quick and easy to do. This is the Ophidian Gateway, the GW kit. I love it. Love it for its Skyrim theming with all the dragons and all these details on the corner, and even these little mouthpieces like they're straight out of Skyrim. However, it was a pig to assemble, as I'm pretty sure I've mentioned before. But again, got all this flocked following the flocking that I did before on the ruined pieces. You'll notice this one is a lot yellower in its tone, and I used a lot more of the Woodland Scenics Earth blend on it because I think this fits that kind of autumny look that Skyrim has. It's a little bit more bleaker in places than everything being lush green, so I felt like that was a better fit for what I had in mind. And here we are with the mill. So this is my scale Space Marine here to show you how big everything is. It's come out really well. I decided in the end not to glue this down or to mount the base on the actual tile. And that is because I figured at some point I might want to use some of these buildings as scatter pieces on like a mat to play smaller games where I don't have to roll out this enormous board for. I have therefore put it on a little base made of leftover Hearst Arts pieces where it just nicely snugly fits in there and kind of blends it into the ground. I'm going to keep this mostly dirt because the idea being it would have been a high traffic area, so I will just put a little bit of grassing around the edge to blend it in with the other look, but keep it kind of worn looking. I've got some of these permanently adhered on, and then some of these crates are scatter pieces. These tiles at the moment where I painted them, I think look a little bland, so I'm going to go in with some brown washes and green washes and kind of stain them a little bit, get some grass in between all the cracks and kind of make them look less like tiles. Moving around here, we see the dock area, and this is where the water pour is going to come in. Again, my friend Dan, who does the Bearded Gamers podcast, did a pour on his Crisis Protocol board for the Marvel game. He advised me that it's going to take a lot of resin to fill this up, so we're going for quite a shallow pour, and we'll be getting that done shortly in the video. And here we have some of the removable tiles. So the idea is that I've got a lot of pieces on these expanded PVC or EPVC or Foamex boards that when I've sanded them properly will slot in and out of the spaces that I've left in the tiled surface. So that'll be like interchangeable scatter terrain that I can move around, so to have things more open or more clogged up as I need to. And I've got these nice GW graveyard kits. It is the Sigmarite Mausoleum, or was the Garden of Moor. Really nice theming. These I've kept the ground cover even barer looking. There's a lot more dirt showing through because I want it to look a little devoid of life. This is the 3D printed blacksmith replacement for the Herstarts one that I did build, because that thing is just too big in scale and too heavy to move around. So this lightweight plastic one's great. The roof will be glued together, but it'll be easily removable, so the interior will be playable. It's got a little billows in there and a little furnace, etc. So really good. This is the 3D printed terrain piece that was free by an artist called Code 2 on Thingiverse. If anybody wants to look it up, they've got some great buildings available for free. It became playable inside, and I've just jazzed it up with, again, more of these crates that I got from White Shark Gaming before he closed. And it just adds a little bit more visual interest to the buildings, I think, and hopefully in game terms it'll give you something to maneuver around. And then over here we've got yet another piece of the graveyard, and again these are all on the same sized plastic basis. They can be easily swapped around and made different. So here we have the castle walls, and I have 3D printed these pieces which all need gluing together. They're a little shiny, so it's kind of hard to see, but they've got a nice flagstony brick texture on them, and on the base they've got these cobblestony bricks which I will stipple some texture paste on to kind of hide the 3D printing lines. On the sides they've come out really nicely though, and by the time I sponge paint them, like I've mentioned before, you won't even notice. They are super light and really easy to handle. And this was my original piece. Now, I showed on a couple of videos ago how to do a mold for this. And if you don't want to get a 3D printer, doing it this way is still a great way to do it. The problem for me was it was a little too heavy. Even with the polystyrene in the middle, sandwiched in between, it just was too heavy, and I was worried that it would fall over too easily, and or if it did, crush the life out of whatever it lands on. So really not a good option if you've got your miniatures on the table. And I'm very worried about it chipping. So the plastic option is definitely better for me. It was super easy to do the gate. I had no idea how I was going to do the gate with these. I would have probably had to leave a gap and then custom build something to fit in between. 3D printing the archway is a lot larger, and it was so much easier to manage. I've got some scatter pieces like this statue that can go in the opening to make sure there's enough space for the city entrance. And overall, these are a lot easier to handle. I will still glue them up in 1 foot sections like this, so they're easy to store and move around. And by the time I get them based on here, they'll look pretty good. And the last piece to show is the war tower around this side. So this is another 3D printed piece. This comes from a very old design, which I didn't think would be a problem. But then when I printed it out, it's not been designed with overhangs in mind. So when you're 3D printing from the bottom up, pieces that go in and out, if it comes out too sharply, the machine doesn't have any base on which to squirt the plastic to build the new layer, so it kind of droops down into thin air and sets. So you get a lot of these spindly little errors that really don't look very good. I've masked most of these by either scraping off the worst ones and or painting them with the sponge again to try and hide the effect, and I'm going to put some mossy pieces on the really bad bits, which will just be flock, this flock mixed with PVA glue to make a little moss paste. Yeah, slight error, I forgot to print a level that has a door in it. So when I glued it all together, I realised that there's no entrance here, but you know, you make do with what it is. As a piece, it looks absolutely fine. And then it comes on this nice little base, which again, is 3D printed rocks, and I'll try and get these in view. Again, I stippled onto them the texture paste, just the Vallejo one, and by the time I put some dirt pieces on there, it looks pretty good and you can't really see the 3D printed lines. And then I've just made rough ground here with the coarse earth mix that I made before by sieving dirt. So I've got a load of the stones and then just covered it up in all this flocking, which is the coarse turf. And then this is the Luke's APS clump foliage. And again, little details like I made sure I gouged out in the sculptor mold the pathway here and left it quite earthen. And then keeping it like this and using these different grades of texture really break up the ground and make it look like uneven ground and not just one big piece of grass. So these are the pieces that I've done so far. I don't have much more to do in terms of buildings and towers and stuff like that. The rest of it is going to be getting on with the groundwork around here. That'll probably be in the next vlog, how I'm going to make this look really uneven and interesting and get all the locations down for the trees and rocks. But let's move on with some actual progress. Okay, so we'll start with the cliff faces, and I'm going to paint these with the leopard spotting technique. So that involves using thinned down washes that soak into the plaster surface, and using the randomizing techniques, you get quite a realistic look. So I'll start with 2 colors, and you want to have 2 different colors for this. So I'm going for a reddy brown and a yellow ochre. You can use green undertones, blue undertones, and this is just to set like a variation in tone in the rock, because no rock is just grey. We do then go over with a thin wash of grey to set the base colour of the whole rock face as grey. And then you go in with a black wash afterwards to shade all the recesses and make the texture really pop, because these Woodland Scenics molds plus the plaster work that I did in the gaps has got a good amount of texture. You want a bunch of little pots to mix your paints up in, because you've got to make them quite thin. So having them pre-mixed on hand is a really good way of doing it. Okay, so I've pre-mixed all my paints in little pots, which is super handy for this, and I've got a little pot to wash out my brushes in as well. I advise doing this on a test piece, which I've done off camera. So I'm going to start with the yellow colour, and I'm just going to get a little bit of it on my brush. It's very thin and watery. You can see here it's super thin, and the idea being it's just going to stain the rocks. So I'm going to put it on kind of randomly in patches, and the idea is to cover about a third of the overall surface with this first colour, and I'm really not being very accurate, as you can see. Splotching it on, and this is why it's called the leopard spotting technique, because you're putting patches that are kind of splotchy like a leopard's spots. And the key is to make it kind of look randomised and not try and be too detailed. Have a little overlap here, about another third again with the reddy brown. Leave some white patches, because they're going to act as like plain grey and semi-highlights when you're doing this, and putting the next colour over the top. And you'll see that these are basically dry. By the time I've gone to this end, the plaster has soaked everything up and it's kind of dry. So then you can just go in and do some final touch-ups. I want a little bit more of the yellow colour in here, because it looks a bit, there you go, nicely mottled. And I'll give that like 1 minute and skip forward to let that dry. Right, that's dried, so I'm going to go in with the grey now, which you can see I've mixed a little bit thicker, and that's because we're going to now use this to set the overall tone for the rocks. So like this one, you don't put it in splotches, you want to cover the whole piece, and you want to kind of do it roughly. Again, it's going to soak into that plaster straight away, and I'm thinking here as it's going on, it's actually looking a little too strong, so I will just add a splash more water. And this makes quite a lot, so I will save the leftovers for the other 3 rock faces, that I've got to do for the 4 pieces to each have one. Make sure you get in under all the little nooks and crannies like this, and then next stage is going to be with the black. Okay, now that everything's dry, you can see it's set a nice base tone with some variations. What we don't want when we do the black is we don't want the black to stain the surface anymore, because what will happen is it'll become way too dark and you'll lose a lot of the effects. We just want the black to highlight in the texture. So what we need to do is now put a sealing layer on the top so that the plaster stops soaking up everything that's put on it. So what I've got here is I've got a thinned down mix of Mod Podge, and I use Mod Podge because it doesn't reactivate with water. So the good thing is when we go over with other washes later, it's not going to affect the paint that's the layer that's on there. If it was PVA glue and you reactivate it, it starts to get a bit mucky. What we want is the wash to be able to flow over the piece and just settle in all the recesses. So I'm going to give this a coat of the Mod Podge. Right, the power of hindsight, I shouldn't have done that with the brush. I should have done that with a spray bottle, because what happened was I actually started to wear off some of the paint that were on the edges, and it got way too bright white with the highlights. So I just splodged on some slightly thicker grey paint where I accidentally wore it off. I would definitely advise using a spray bottle. Any old household sprayer, kitchen sprayer, bathroom sprayer, repurpose for this is absolutely fine. And it's a 3-to-1 mix of the Mod Podge to water, so it's quite thin and runny, and spray it on and let it dry. But now that it's dried, we can move on with the black wash. Okay, it's black wash time, and it's fairly thin. Better to go slightly thin and do more than one layer rather than go too thick and stain everything black. And I've done it on a test piece as well, so I know that it looks pretty good. And you've got to generously flood this over so that it runs everywhere. So be quite heavy with it and let it run. And if you have to go back for a second coat, that's not a problem at all. Try and pop any bubbles or any massive recesses that you get that are too flooded, like you would with shading a miniature. But again, anything else you need to go back over afterwards, we can do 2 layers. Right, first layer is just about dry, and we can see that there's not enough definition in some places, so I'm going to go back in with a bit more thinned wash and do another coat and see how this comes out. Right, so you could stop it just here. You just got the last few bits of wash drying and it's starting to look really good. This looks like a nice natural looking rock texture. I'm going to get a little fancy with it here, which you can do as well. I've got a spray bottle here with water with a drop of rinse aid in it, but you could easily use any form of dish soap just to act as a surface tension breaker, and also a pot of brown paint that I've thinned a little, but really not much. And what I'm going to do is spritz the surface like this, and just in 1 or 2 places put a tiny little dab of the brown. Here it's mixing with some of the black wash that was already there, and like in a big crevice like you've got here, I'm going to put quite a generous amount in like this. And then I've got a damp brush that I've got in a little pot of water off camera that I'll just brush most of the water off of, and then I will just kind of feather the outside. I've done this before on the terrain pieces, and it will just look like rain has washed dirt down, particularly in that deep crevice. You know, there's another one like in here that I can do, and by spritzing the water on the surface, it lets you blend it out quite easily, so you don't get tide marks or like an edge to it, and it just breaks up the grey, black effect in a way that looks realistic by putting dirt where it would gather. So just do this in 1 or 2 places. I'm pretty much going to call that done there. By the time I've also put a little bit of actual dirt in there when I'm doing the texturing, and the occasional bit of flock to look like grass growing, which will do nice to hide this glue splodge that I managed to get on there when I fitted them in the first place. Overall, once it dries, it's going to look quite realistic. Right, I'm just doing a bit of a close-up here to make a point about how good it looks overall from the minimal effort. The rock's got some nice highlights here, some nice shadows. 1 or 2 places here it's a little dark, and that's because I cheated and tried to speed up the drying with a heat gun. So the black just dried a little too obvious in 1 or 2 spots here, but I will just, again, put some dirt in there when I'm doing the textures on top so it looks like it's cascaded down. Will look absolutely fine. Some greenery and stuff to hide this, but overall, it's got a really nice texture to it. You can dry brush this with a khaki colour or a cream colour if you really want to make it pop, but I will decide that right at the end after I've done everything, because the best thing now is for me to work on the ground covers, which I'll do shortly, and get everything else done, including all the water and everything, and then see how it looks. And then right at the end, you can adjust the brightness a little bit with a bit of a lazy dry brush. And that way you can kind of tailor it to how it looks once it's not surrounded by this awful white polystyrene. All right, this is it. We're prepping for the big resin pour. So some things I've got here based on some advice I got from a listener called Dan Blakemore is that I need to dam the end up here. And I already knew I needed to do this. And the tip I got was to use a solid surface like a piece of wood that's not going to bend and flex, so it can cover the gap nicely, and to cover it in a straight, non-wrinkled layer of packing tape. This is because epoxy resins, etc., don't stick to the plastic that packaging tape is made out of. So I got myself a nice new roll, and when I put it on here to dam it all up, there will be a little gap around the edge. Rather than the resin seeping in, it's quite runny and flowing out and running everywhere, I'm going to seal that gap with
5-minute epoxy. That's because this stuff will go off way before it has time to find its way down to the bottom and create a dam. I can pour the resin in after that, and then when we're finished, this also should pop off of the packing tape without any trouble. So let's see how we get on. Alright, we're gearing up to do the resin pour here, and I've got my resin, which is the water clear polyester resin. All I can tell you is it absolutely stinks, so do this in a ventilated area if you buy the same thing. And this is the catalyst. Now I'm going to quadruple check the ratios, and I'm going to go with the 2% mix. So I've got to do 2% by weight, and make sure you check these things very carefully. So I've got a set of scales here which I'll measure out the resin and the hardener. I will add the resin into the pot first, zero the scales, add the hardener at 2%, mix everything very, very carefully, scraping around the bottom and the sides to make sure it gets mixed up nicely, and then when I come back we should be ready for the pour. Okay, bit of hobby honesty here. The resin pour is going to come in a later video because I've opened my jar of resin, which is brand spanking new, and I've got this nasty looking residue at the top which suggests something's gone wrong and it's gone off. And I guess I will be doing the resin pour in another week or two, so let's cover it in the next vlog, I guess. This is the sort of thing that happens with hobby, and there's no avoiding it. It's the only resin that I've got, so I will come back and do this another time. There's plenty more things to be getting on with. So, quick little ending summary. Not the productive week that I had planned, but with the resin issue, but a couple of lessons in vlogging, I think. One, double check your materials beforehand. Really need to do that next time. And maybe next time I should film the intro after I've done all of my progress for the vlog to make sure I actually know what I'm going to get done. So, catch you all next time.